Hey guys, welcome back to another quick episode of the Casual NBA Fanatic podcast. Today we're just going to go into a few of the positives that we've seen from this past off-season period. It has been quite a busy free agency period that we've just had passed and still involved in, and one where we saw a dramatic shift in role players across the league. I think teams have realized the importance of depth once again, with two deep stacked squads making the finals and proving again the importance of having variety and versatility and having different archetypes of players on your roster, guys that can compete and have success in different multitude of matchups. In this, I've got two episodes going through the three of my biggest winners of the free agency period, and as well as my three biggest losers of the period, which I'll name in the next episode. Obviously, a ton can still change, but we are looking at these teams from how important this period was for certain franchises whose main goal was to try and establish themselves prior to next season and using this free agency period to do so. And in saying that, my first top-tier team from their free agency duties was the Atlanta Hawks, just a team who has been relatively lost in terms of their roster structure, juggling with the process of building around a heliocentric offensive engine, a guy that presents severe defensive limitations. Building around someone like that is something extremely hard to do in the modern NBA, as we've seen. And we see how versatility and two-way impact has thrived in this league and how prioritizing one side of the floor can ultimately hold you in mediocrity, like we've seen with Atlanta, as well as teams like Sacramento with their offensive structure and Orlando leaning towards more of their defensive dominance. But we've seen a huge degree with some major deals and crucial signings to put together a roster that is ready to compete for a top 4 seed in the weak Eastern Conference. And with the Hawks getting one of the most talented bigs of all time in Kristaps Porzingis, a guy who is on a relatively decent health trajectory now after going down with obviously post-viral syndrome, which ended up tanking his production towards the second half of last season. They're in a really pivotal spot to have a really high ceiling going into next season with their roster talent. In that trade, the Hawks only gave up Georges Niang, Terrence Mann, and 2 picks. And in this, they bring in the best big man of the Trae Young era. They get a guy who substantially raises the offensive ceiling whilst giving them a reasonably high defensive floor. And he brings this professional rim protection as that drop coverage defensive anchor, guy who has very reliable footwork and mobility to match with his length and size that he brings. And overall, that just provides insane levels of rim deterrence that Atlanta hasn't really had. KP just absorbs and withstands physicality a lot better than Onyeka Okongwu can at this point in their careers. And he has been an elite shot contester at the rim for years now. I mean, he's bringing a veteran and experienced light to their backline defense. And last year, I pulled up the stats before, he caused a staggering negative 15.5% differential when contesting looks within 6 feet. That was the most outstanding mark for players to have contested 250 shots or more. He's ahead as his efficiency as a shot blocker by volume was ahead of guys like Jaren Jackson, Victor Wembanyama, Anthony Davis, Walker Kessler, and Donovan Clingan. This is ultimately where he'll be most valuable for Atlanta on the defensive side. But on the other hand, he does bring his play finishing skill set is just something that Atlanta hasn't tasted since guys like John Collins, Al Horford, and Ersan Ilyasova. And we know KP brings this play finishing piece to a much more possession-based level as well. You talk about the post-up touch, the feathery post-up touch that he has, the over-the-top advantages, the jab footwork in the post. One of the most efficient post players of all time, with now 2 seasons under his belt leading the efficiency mark for high-volume post-up guys in the league. And he brings this to Atlanta to give them more of that safe offensive punch, to look towards more than just spamming Trae Young pick-and-roll, pull-up floater looks. And with the pick-and-roll versatility that he also brings, he opens up a ton more lanes for Trae to use that speed and nimble frame, so he can work in less clogged environments as well. Something that he brings with the diversity of his skill set. And though Trae's not the best athlete, having added room with KP's ability to pop out to the perimeter effectively, with his already established gifts, will be absolutely huge for Trae, improving the efficiency of his playmaking overall. Having more space will grant him cleaner passing windows, more release angles at the rim to hunt, and that just allows him to play with a ton more confidence as well. So by value, bringing in Kristaps Porzingis is an extreme gain for Atlanta. He just gives Atlanta a power-punching two-man game and gives them the most efficient action with his post-up excellence. And for me, I think the Hawks absolutely won this, and hopefully we'll see Kristaps Porzingis healthy next season to contribute to a top-tier East contender. Not only this, but high-level role player and two-way contributor Nickeil Alexander-Walker was brought in the sign and trade. He signed for 4 years, $62 million. Just gives Atlanta more of that two-way play finishing, more screen navigation to uphold the great traits that Dyson Daniels brings on the defensive end. In terms of creating a defensive ceiling that is capable enough of contending with the best, the Hawks have done pretty well during this offseason. They brought in two legit starting quality guys. And with the Dyson Nickeil defensive front line, I think the Hawks have two guys that they can deploy on separate archetypes. I mean, I think, in my opinion, Nickeil Alexander-Walker presents more of that agile and strong recovery defender, so he can take more of those pick and roll heavy guys. Dyson Daniels is more of that physically developed creation stopper, extreme hands and extreme anticipation, so he can wall off more of those isolation threats. Just a great pickup. You pick up one of the best role players on the market for a very efficient contract for how much value he does bring to the floor, and a guy who just came off his best season yet, shooting over 42% on his catch and shoot looks. Their last pickup that the Atlanta Hawks made to round out their free agency period was picking up Luke Kennard. Just a guy that just adds to their offensive skill as well as like off the bench production as well, which they would have lost, giving up Bogdan Bogdanovic halfway through last year and losing Karis LeVert. And especially from the standpoint when you're looking at Dyson Daniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker as the primary wings on this squad, they are overall quite limited offensive guys. And bringing in a skill guard like Luke Kennard, a guard that can help accentuate Trey's heliocentric skill set a bit more, I find that extremely important. He brings that off-ball gravity as one of the league's most prolific marksmen, shooting 40% on his catch-and-shoot threes, and a guy that provides the possibility to run more deliberate action to get his range involved in games. And though low volume, Luke Kennard was in the 99th percentile for handoff actions, grabbing 1.46 points per possession on 76% effective field goal percentage. Obviously on a limited 26 possessions, but adding to this, a key trait that movement shooters bring to their games is also their transition spacing. And I think also in this avenue, Luke Kennard is one of the best in the league. Just under 2 possessions a game, he shot 70% effective field goal percentage in transition situations. Just something else that he can do to improve the value of those push-ahead offensive possessions that Atlanta does see from time to time, with Jalen Johnson and Trae Young leading the break. Overall, another great cheap pickup. Something that will definitely pay small dividends, as he will definitely contribute to their dedicated offensive structure as that supreme off-ball asset on such a cheap deal. Atlanta for this free agency period so far for me get an A. Obviously, this doesn't make them clear contenders just yet. There are injury and availability concerns that come with the moves that they made, in particular, obviously, Kristaps Porzingis, as well as the fact that their depth isn't exactly proven yet. But they will be heavily relying on Jalen Johnson to provide valuable on-ball minutes in non-Trae minutes. Overall, though, that's the style of offensive structure that the Atlanta Hawks have picked, and they've surrounded Trae with a ton of play finishing pieces who can athletically compete to cover the holes that he does present as a defensive whole. They did supplement real star power into this roster as well. They brought in some high quality role pieces, and that dramatically improves their ceiling heading into next season. And for me, I don't think Atlanta could have done much better at all, considering their situation and their preferences to build around Trae, who still is only 26 years old and in the heat of his prime. So for Atlanta's part, they get an A. I think they dominated this free agency period, just like another team did. I think the Denver Nuggets were another top-tier team who definitely excelled in this period. I think Denver is a team that have definitely resurged their entire lineup with their recent moves, bringing in real role-playing talent to surround their star foundation that they've already established for years now. And they did it to a similar degree this past free agency to what OKC did last year in terms of the level and volume of talent that they did bring in on the margins. Obviously, the biggest move was trading Michael Porter Jr. and a future first for star 3-and-D archetype Cam Johnson, a guy who was wasting a lot of his talent on an uncompetitive Brooklyn Nets team. We're talking about a guy who brings just more outright versatility to his impact game to game. We saw how Michael Porter Jr.'s lack of impact diversity held him back in tight playoff situations. But with this swap that the Nuggets have made, they get to stabilize their defensive wing spot. They get to allow Aaron Gordon to man the backline primarily once again. And he also gives them an athletic boost to the table. He's a much more active driver and transition spark plug as well. He ranked in the 89th percentile of transition possessions and nearly tripled MPJ's drives per game last season. Obviously, context is key here though. MPJ played a one-dimensional role for a cohesive squad. But obviously, as I spoke about on my recent top 100 list, ranking from 100 to 91, there do come limitations to playing this specialist role. And he was clearly the weakest starter in their playoff rotation. And as a shot maker, your game will naturally fluctuate. There's a ton of mental variance night to night that can affect your perfected touch. And when you can't impact the game in other ways, you will struggle to get your momentum and confidence going. As a shooter, being able to offer production by getting to the rim, getting defensive stops, getting easy stuff in transition, being a capable and effective ball mover, you improve your feeling of self-worth, and that gives you the confidence to step into your looks with full faith. And that is something that MPJ lacked in some huge moments for the Nuggets. For me, I think it's safe to say that bringing in Cam Johnson was an absolute no-brainer decision. And going all in on these Jokic years by giving up first-round picks in the future, it's really the only option that you have in these prime Jokic years, where you have the best and most valuable player in the world in the heat of his prime. So unbelievable deal by the Denver Nuggets that substantially raises their ceiling once again. And not just this, the Bruce Brown signing that Denver made, I think it was for the minimum contract. I think that gives you another incremental step to building their point of attack athleticism once again. Bruce Brown, obviously, with a few years out of the limelight after getting shipped around to multiple teams, he hasn't been placed in the situation that suits his role-playing contributions since he was on Denver in 2023. So I believe his return should be relatively seamless overall. Obviously, production and efficiency in really every metric has dropped for him. But what he does bring to this Denver bench immediately is the bench ball handling. He brings some more off-ball intelligence, which they love to surround Nikola Jokic with. And those should be the main aspects that he does bring offensively as a smart and decisive off-ball player who does bring a nice physical frame to the guard spot. Becoming that transition athlete that he was in 2023, for me, will be a requisite part for Bruce Brown. And it's clear that his time without Jokic was a relative struggle for him. But hopefully we should see the confidence come back, and hopefully he can contribute to the high level that he did in 2023 to make Denver this powerhouse that they were just a few years back. The Tim Hardaway Jr. signing, just another decent move on the margins, bringing in some of that one-dimensional shooting that they did lose in the Porter trade. After a decent production-wise season for Detroit, Tim Hardaway is a guy that can get some clean looks as a major plus spot-up player. I mean, the Jonas deal as well, like these are just small deals on the margins that Denver also made, along with the Cam Johnson, Bruce Brown deals that substantially raise their floor. I mean, Jonas is a piece that they've really needed. I know he's still a question mark now. It's a question mark if he leaves overseas or not, but if he stays, dealing away Dario Saric for an actual playable piece who can hold a lot of physical post qualities and the screening physicality that Jokic does is certainly another great masterstroke move by the Denver Nuggets' new front office here. And that improves them on the margins in this win now mindset. And that's really key for what Denver need to do. They need to fill in their gaps. Obviously, they have Deron Holmes as the backup if Jonas decides to leave. But Denver have made multiple moves to clearly improve their depth, which has been the biggest issue with their roster construction in the Jokic era, and especially post their championship in 2023. For me, in the free agency period, the Nuggets get a clear A+. Their situation only allowed moves on the margins, really, and they went and got everything that they were supposed to attain here. They replaced the MPJ spot. They got some more bench ball handling. They filled in the backup 5-man minutes. And they totally juiced up their defensive athleticism at the wing and at the point of attack, which allows Aaron Gordon to sift back into his role as that backline defensive captain, which is where they were at their best defensively in 2023. The third team that I have that was in this top tier was probably the team that was most active, the Houston Rockets. They've had quite the eventful free agency period. And prior to that, they brought in superstar KD to fill in their spacing gaps tremendously. We're talking about a guy who upholds their jacked levels of length. He brings flexible mobility. He brings relative defensive versatility. And Durant has proven the ability to compete defensively year by year with his great hands, with his vertical reach, with his lateral balance, and his pretty relatively strong frame. Stronger frame than some will realize that he does bring to the game. And despite the age concerns, KD will be 37 at the start of the season. Despite all that, KD's game is one of the most effortless and skill-dependent things that you will find across the league. Meaning that his game will translate as far as his work ethic takes him, which we know is one of the greatest in sports history. The spacing issues were the main abomination for Houston, and bringing a guy like Kevin Durant mightily fixes this. You bring in a 7-foot wing who can provide tons of off-ball gravity to your creators. And it gives guys like Amon Thompson and Alperen Sengun the runway or the post space that they need to allow their talents to shine. Kevin Durant just brings movement shooting as well to Houston, something that they haven't really had much of last year to a credible level. Obviously, Jalen Green was the designated movement shooter piece for them in the starting lineup. A little bit of Dylan Brooks there as well, but Jalen Green is clearly far from ready to compete on a winning stage as a starter. And primarily, KD can fill in a lot of the holes that he was given up for. The defense on the perimeter that he was given up for in the Dylan Brooks piece, the athleticism, but obviously the shot pull-up gravity that Jalen Green brought. KD just brings all of these tools to a much higher level. He's just such a versatile piece, fluid ball handler, fluid passer, and just a very decent overall athlete. He's one of the most polished guys in the league in terms of the shooting touch. And though he doesn't provide much rim pressure or downhill drives like Jalen Green may have not on an occasional basis, almost anything KD gives you with the pull-up and tough shot making will be more efficient in the aggregate than a young and still very raw Jalen Green, who hasn't popped the way that they would have hoped after such a long-term investment that they put in for him as the former number 2 pick. KD puts this team as a top-tier championship contender, so for that, this trade was pivotal in the Rockets looking ready to win next year. Besides that big trade, the Rockets were active in retaining their talent. They re-signed 6 guys, and 3 of them as nightly rotation pieces in Jabari Smith, Fred VanVleet, Steven Adams, Jayshawn Tate, Jeff Green, and Aaron Holiday. Through these re-signings and these trades, their core identity, their intended core identity is absolutely vivid. They are a highly physical and extremely intimidating team that will win games on the margins backed by their motor and athleticism, and these re-signings reiterate that belief greatly. Fred VanVleet had an exceptional 7-game series versus the Warriors, and he gives them that mature table setter and pull-up shooting talent who can establish his bigs positioning in pick and roll as a developed passer, a guy that uses his bulky frame to uphold his elite ball security traits. And keeping a veteran and former champion on your roster doesn't meddle with the chemistry more than they already have, and definitely worth it to keep him on for another 2 years as this smaller window due to KD's age, this smaller championship competing window for these next 2 years. It's vital to have your point guard piece set. Re-signing Jabari Smith is a talent more for the future. A guy that certainly does give them multifaceted versatility at the moment. He brings an extremely versatile frame and mobility profile that has always been intriguing since he was drafted 3rd overall. The over-the-top advantages on the shooting between KD and Jabari will be a nightly advantage on the perimeter for Houston. And hopefully this is the year that Jabari does pop in his designated role as a spot-up target and a more structured and spaced offense with KD's arrival. Obviously, guys like Steven Adams, Tate, Jeff Green, and Aaron Holiday are guys who just bring value as two-way and energetic athletes, guys that won't see too much of the floor. Well, with Adams' case, he's probably the main and most likely rotation piece out of these four. A guy that was a rotation piece last year and a guy that alleviated much of their offensive concerns last year with his ability to fight and battle for extra possessions better than really anyone in the league. He averaged nearly 8 offensive boards per 36. And so bringing in, and re-signing Steven Adams, it's more about retaining the proven role players that they already have. And the Rockets have definitely done that whilst also luring Clint Capella and Dorian Finney-Smith as well. All of these moves just only add to the defensive athleticism profile of this squad. The DFS move itself brings more of that spacing that they desired this offseason. They bring in a designated spot-up shooter. He's relatively limited with his offensive capacity, but someone who just adds to their identity and hopefully has enough speed in the tank to compete as a perimeter defensive asset with such a big front line backing him up. The Clint Capella deal just gives them more assurance between their bigs, a more offensively gifted player than Steven Adams with the mobile roll man stuff, but it just offers them more flexibility with their rotation and 5 decent quality starting centers that they can staunch teams with these big looks that they used to run last year. Overall, the Rockets have done a very decent job of doubling down on their targeted identity, whilst also filling in major priorities, whilst boosting the star power on their roster by bringing in a superstar talent like Kevin Durant to lead their offensive approach. However, though, they still lack the holistic offensive skill with guys like Fred VanVleet who can bring fluctuating rates of shot making. They still got Amen Thompson as one of their premier stars who does have struggles to make basic perimeter shots and so on. But the Rockets have built enough room for error in their physical and energetic personality, and they have brought in a sufficient level of perimeter shot making in Kevin Durant and Dorian Finney-Smith alone to make their offense sustainable enough so far to compete for a championship just next year. And for that, I gave the Houston Rockets offseason and free agency period worth of signings, re-signings, and trades an A-. And with that marks my 3 biggest winners of the annual free agency period. For me, I absolutely love what these teams were able to accomplish. Recognizing the need to balance both recruiting star talent, but also recruiting role players to improve their roster construction holistically. And overall, I'm just so excited to see what these teams can do as far as raising their ceiling in what is a stacked NBA that we have today. And by nailing this crucial period, I think these 3 teams have substantially raised their level of competitiveness for the title just next year. I thank you guys for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one when I deep dive through my 3 biggest losers of the free agency period.